inside out, it will be relevant if informing the intelligence needs policymakers of the threats. So we'll put threat assessment. The threat assessment will be relevant if it addresses vulnerabilities, if it addresses inherent systemic weaknesses, if it addresses vulnerabilities in security, right? So here will be policy needs, policy and intelligence needs, outside in. Inside out, it will be relevant if it addresses specific threat assessments. And this is more this is my analysis, but this is what I would consider sort of a closed loop assessment of the relevance of. So to take it even deeper, a closed loop sort of systemic analysis of the relevance of the types of information. It's not just relevant in abstraction, it's relevant on at least two levels. I can deconstruct this more, but I won't do that now, it'd be overkill. But relevant in terms of external out, external in terms of policy needs, intelligence needs, internal out in terms of threat assessment. Okay, number two, obviously timely. It needs to be timely. The most disquieting acronym an analyst can see is OBE. Overtaken by events. You don't want to see OBE, right? You don't want that the work that you're doing, because what this means is everything that you just did was, I mean, I hate to speak frankly, this is a waste of time. Things have been overtaken by events. What you were processing, assessing, analyzing is no longer relevant because time has lapsed. And now we are on to the next big cache, if you will. A lot of this, you can't necessarily plan for this, right? But a lot of this can be mitigated. This time sensitivity can be mitigated by proper planning. As I said in the first hour or so, this relationship between policymakers and the way I'm going to teach this, right? This relationship between policymakers and members of the intelligence community is really, really to make well-informed, logical, rational, scientific decisions, right? Give the policymakers a deliverable that gives them the opportunity to make decisions in the interest of national security, in the interest of the national mission, the ideological governing sort of mechanism, whatever that might be. And the idea is, in terms of the timeliness of that, we need to keep time sensitivity in mind. So if there is a sense in which there is an immediate threat that is identified internally, that needs to be translated with immediacy to policymakers so they can position themselves and their diplomats and us globally. Similarly, if policymakers recognize that there is an impending threat and they want to get more information on the nature of how that might occur, well, it's clearly not immediate, right? This might take years to plan. Or if it's the case that this wouldn't be so much policymaker, this might be more internally, and I don't necessarily want to talk about that. So so we'll just leave it at that. We'll leave it at that point, right? Some of this stuff I'm not going to discuss publicly because I'm just not. Number three. So timeliness is obvious. Number three, accuracy. I mean, that's sort of obvious. I don't even really need to mention that. Accuracy is critically important. Intelligence, it needs to be accurate. Now, I do want to put one sort of caveat with respect to accuracy. I don't mean accuracy in terms of certainty. I don't believe in certainty as just a sort of life. My own personal view is I don't believe in certainty. I understand sort of the tenets of what's known as monotonic logic, right? Sort of truth functionality is being assignable to proposition X. It's true just because it's true. The reality of what intelligence community members do, as I said before, is almost entirely, if not exclusively, non-monotonic, meaning that there are variations in degrees of truth. It's more or so likely. It's more or so true. It's sort of within the governance of fuzzy logic. And you know, maybe I will do a fuzzy logic lecture series. I don't know. I don't have time. But The idea is, in terms of this ambiguity, and I've done quite a bit of this already for YouTube, the idea is the ambiguity of the information, as far as I'm concerned, does not need to reach certainty. There has to be an acceptable threshold with which, based on any given data, this is the best information that we have at the time, given the resources and the manpower and the woman power that we got. This is the best information. As long as it's the best conceivable information at the time, that's the best that you can ask for. Is it the case then that this is always going to work out right? Clearly not. I mean, if you look at what happened with Colin Powell's address pertaining to weapons of mass destruction, I mean, the information that we had at the time wasn't the best information. I mean, it was the best information at the time. People might argue that point. Some people might argue that point. But assuming a charitable interpretation, it was the best information at the time. It was just wrong. So, and for any number of reasons, and now years removed from that, there's a much more interesting story about sort of espionage and deceit from operatives that wanted to mislead us. The bit that I get from that that's just absolutely amazing is how individual people can undermine national security interests, right? That's freaking insane. And that's the era that we live in now, right? It's no longer sort of individual sovereign state actors that pose, even though they do, pose the greatest national security risk. We're in an era now where you've got to be aware of sort of individual agents, individual actors, independent to any institutional affiliation and the threats that they pose. And it's not really going to be, the lone shooter. And as much as people talk about sort of dirty bombs, it's not really going to be that either. It's really going to be the hacker, the individual God-level genius hacker who can code something and destroy everything. That's the threat, right? How do you protect against that, right? So in terms of the accuracy of the information, it's the best information that we have at the time, and we recognize there's going to be a gradation. It's not going to be absolute certainty. We know for 100%, because it's likely the case that you don't know for 100%. So that's my sort of disclaimer with respect to accuracy. Number 4 is completion, right? C-O-M-P-L. You want to make sure that the good intelligence is complete, meaning sort of closed loop. And I'm not going to get into sort of system dynamics analysis, but a closed loop information. All actors, all parties within this conceptual analysis refer back to other parties within the conceptual analysis, so we have a complete systemic understanding. We might not know all of the parts, all of the functions, but we have a complete systemic understanding. There are no quote-unquote loose ends, right? So a holistic integration of all source information. Reports should be coordinated and collected. I would go a step further than just saying sort of the information is all sourced information. It's that, meaning that we have, as we said, the author said, there's a dovetail of the INTs, right? One INT sort of dovetails into the next to create this holistic interpretation that the analysts are going to finally give the final meaning. But more importantly than that, in terms of saying that the information and the intelligence is complete, the completion of the information, and this is a bit more difficult to understand, the completion of the information, to say that the assessment, the analysis is complete, means that insofar as the intelligence needs of the policymakers have been satisfied, insofar as the intelligence needs of the policymakers have been satisfied and done so to the best of the intelligence community's ability, we say that the information is complete. Again, I've already said you can't use the intelligence. You shouldn't. It's an ethical claim. You shouldn't use the intelligence community in a fascist way to just give you information to verify your assumptions and to legitimize your biases. It should be the case that policymakers have needs for an understanding of X, and they assume that X is going to be interpreted in this way. That information is collected, gathered, processed, sorted, given to you, only to find out that your assumptions were wrong, and then decisions are made based on this new information. That's what complete intelligence does, right? The complete intelligence can reinforce